Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today I kind of wanted to walk you through the process of trying to find my birth parents. I'm in a very talkative mood tonight and just wanted to share some of the actions that I've taken to get a little bit closer to hopefully one day meeting my birth parents, in case you're ever encouraged to start pursuing that journey yourself. So for context, I was quote unquote born in Nanning, China in 1996. I was found 6 weeks later in a railway station, and so that's like my official abandonment location. And I was in the orphanage for about a year and a half before I was adopted and brought to the United States. My birth parent search honestly started right around the pandemic, because as the pandemic was occurring, there was a lot of anti-China and anti-Asian hate that rose in the US. I felt like I was being judged for my appearance and not for who I am. And that period of time really forced me to confront a part of my identity that I hadn't really thought about before. And I decided to start doing more research on what the adoption process and what the one-child policy was around that time. And it was definitely very eye-opening to learn a different perspective and a different narrative than I had been told growing up. And this is to no fault, my parents, they were given a narrative as well, and they shared that with me. But I think especially as you start digging deeper, the issue of the one-child policy and the context surrounding it is much more complex than we as adoptees are told and believe as we grow up. If you are interested in learning more, here are some of the books and some of the documentaries that I think may be a good starting point if you're wanting to just dip your toe into the waters. I'll say a lot of those are not easy reads. Like, I definitely had to be in a certain mindset to be open to receiving news or facts that maybe cause dissonance with things that I've already known. But I felt like it was a good start to understand that landscape a little bit more and challenge the beliefs that I had. Part of that research process was also looking through documents that I had. So that includes my adoption paperwork, photos from the orphanage, understanding if I had foster parents at any time, talking to my parents about that time and what information they knew, and documenting that. Because while I had access growing up to all of this, I don't think I was in the mindset or had the maturity to really understand the lengths that my parents went to go get me, or like even the process as a whole of not only applying to the adoption agency and having to get references from your boss and from community members, but the sheer amount of money that was involved, the amount of meetings that you had with the adoption agency, with lawyers. I think it gave me a sense of gratitude to understand just how much effort and care was put into the adoption process that didn't necessarily shift my perspective, but gave it a more full picture. I also wanted to make sure that we hadn't lost any documents, so I reached out to my adoption agency to make sure I could get another copy of the records that they had on hand, and thankfully they were the same, but it's also good to have that digital copy. And I'd encourage, if you are considering this journey, to go ahead and do the same process, and also make sure that you take digital copies of all of the paperwork that you have in case there is a fire, or you move house and lose things, or you have a falling out with your parents and you lose access to those documents. I think it's really important that you take the due diligence now to be able to have a backup just in case. So the first actual tangible step that I took to try to find my birth parents was submitting my DNA to 23andMe. And from the research that I've seen and collected, it seems like 23andMe has the best sample population to test against for adoptees. So I would probably recommend that if you're going to do a DNA service, to test against 23andMe. And once those results come back, I'd also encourage you to take everything it says with a grain of salt. And I say that because when my 23andMe results first arrived, it told me I was 90% Chinese and 10% Vietnamese. And where Nanning is in relation to Vietnam, like, that's not a huge stretch. But 6 months later, then my results changed to be 100% Chinese. So at one point I thought, oh, maybe there's this Vietnamese heritage that I didn't know about that I can tap into and connect with, only to see later, oh, actually, no, you don't. That's not part of your history or your ancestry and your identity. So I would hold off also on buying the book in case your results do change as more samples come in. So once I had the raw data from the 23andMe results, I went and uploaded it to a handful of other sites to see if they possibly have matches themselves. So the 3 that I uploaded it to is GED Match, which is a platform that I found through a Facebook group that definitely tests across multiple other DNA sources, WeGene and 23 Mofang, which those 2 are Chinese DNA DNA databases, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and upload to all three. I go back and check every, 5 to 6 months to see if there's been any matches since then. I have not personally connected with anyone closer than a third cousin. Most of them are fourth through fifth cousins, so there's less than 1% DNA relation. But when it came to 23andMe, I did actually get in touch with someone who is the mom of, I think, a fourth or fifth cousin, and they were relatively close, and so we had lunch one day together, and while it didn't necessarily help with the journey of finding my birth parents, it was really great to find community and people that understand kind of what you're going through. I think finding support wherever it may be, whether it's friends or it's family, as you go through this process is really important because it can definitely be an emotional roller coaster. There's days where I'm super hyped about trying to find my parents, and then there's other days where I don't give a shit, to be honest. There are a few other things that I've considered doing and I have either chosen not to do or I plan on doing. The first is a Finder ad. I have nothing against a Finder ad. Inside I cringe just a little bit about thinking about putting that information on a poster and then going and handing it out physically. So I personally have chosen not to do that, but eventually I probably will, and I'll post it at least on Xiaohongshu. Another thing that I was in the process of doing is submitting my blood sample to the National Reunion Database. I was thankful to get the card through the Nanchang Project, definitely butchering the name, I'm so sorry, and they help adoptees reconnect with their birth parents. And honestly, the only thing holding me back about submitting it was pricking my finger and having to go through that slight pain, but it is something that I'll do when I return to China. The database was originally created to help kidnapped kids reunite with their parents. And so there have been stories of success for adoptee kids to be able to be reunited. So it's another way that you could possibly find your birth parents. So if you're interested in learning more about that process, I'll go ahead and put a link to that nonprofit below, and hopefully it will lead to something for you yourself. One other area that I tried is posting on Xiaohongshu. And if you decide to go that route, I'd really encourage you to be mentally prepared for some wild comments. I had a lot of people say, be grateful for what you have. Why would you ever want to look for your birth parents? Like, they abandoned you for a reason. Just stop. And to that, I would say, I think there's a lot of misconceptions in China around adoptees and those that had to give up their children during the one-child policy era. And I'd really encourage you to look at those comments with grace. And honestly, just let them brush off, because no one really knows the reasoning behind why you ended up being adopted in the first place, except for those who experienced it firsthand. And until you can get that from them, I don't think anyone truly understands just how difficult a period that was, unless you go and do some of that background research that I mentioned earlier, because there were a lot of extenuating circumstances that forced people between a rock and a hard place. And, I look at those actions with empathy. I don't look at those actions as needing forgiveness personally. It was a choice. There were consequences. I am one of those living consequences, but I look back at my life for me personally, and I've lived a really great life. And for me, it's more about connection. Some of the other comments that I received were, your birth parents are going to force you to marry your blood brother so that he can get a green card to the US. Someone else was like, they're going to kill you so that they can gain access to your assets. And I'm like, what assets? Yeah, just be prepared to face a lot of weird and wild comments. And you can choose to interact with them if you want to. Honestly, as someone with a social media background, I know even these negative comments help boost the algorithm so more people see it. You might also have people coming into your inbox saying they can help you find your birth parents. But if they are successful in finding them, it'll be like $30,000. And I'm like, with what money? The fact that you think I have enough money to be able to afford this, there's definitely a misconception in China that adoptees are wealthy. But I think for me, the thing that keeps me going is the slight hope and the chance that maybe, just maybe, your parents might be searching on the other side for it. There are stories of people who have used Xiaohongshu and were successful in finding their birth parents that way. So it's something I'll keep trying in the future. I need to really sit down and make that conscious effort. But that's another option that you can choose to do, is put your story out there and share it with the world. So one area that I have considered, and I keep contemplating whether it's worth it or not, is hiring a professional searcher. This is someone who may help with creating a search poster, go to the city that you were found in and post, go and talk to locals, talk to the police, possibly go to the orphanage. They may have media partners partners that you can leverage to get your story out. For me personally, I'm still on the fence about whether I wanted to do this. I've been quoted $400 upwards to even more. One thing to note though is to be able to get into the orphanage, depending on where it is, what province it's in and whatnot, is sometimes you have to be a official travel organization to be able to access those orphanages. And the searcher that I contemplated hiring does not have access to the orphanage. That is one thing that I feel like if you're going to hire a searcher, unless they have really deep roots in the community that you're planning on exploring, I don't know if it's necessarily worth doing. That being said, I think there's people that have found some success. I know of one person who went back to her orphanage and found additional documentation that she didn't have access to before that might give a little bit more clues as to at least what her actual birthday and birth date are. For me right now, I have chosen to put a pause on that until I can get a better sense of truly do I want to find my birth parents and what my expectations are after that. And so I think that's something we can actually dive into now, because I started this process because I felt like I would have regrets if I didn't try at least. Truly what I would love to have is some history on my health and, does cancer run in our family? Is there any other like high blood pressure? Things like that that would be really beneficial to me. And then also just knowing when my birthday, birth time, and birth location are. And that's more because I like astrology and horoscopes and things like that. And so having that information is helpful. It's getting to a point where do you really expect to have a relationship with that? Is it a wound that's still festering, or is it just mere curiosity? And I honestly don't really have answers for you in terms of what it is that I want, especially right now. Like, I think as an adoptee, sometimes there's just a need for those questions that you might have to be answered, but I think especially as I went back to China, I didn't really understand what population was until I got there, and I truly understood at that point just how much this is a search for a needle in a haystack situation, because there are so many people in China, and the likelihood of you being able to actually find these individuals is really slim, and sometimes that's really discouraging. I remember when I first arrived in China and I was on the metro and I would be looking around at faces and I'm like, I could be related to you. I could be related to you. It's a weird mindset to have sometimes of not knowing and not necessarily feeling like you belong. I was with friends the other day and I was just commenting on how much she looks like her mother. And it's one of those things where it's like, genetics, because that's not something that, obviously I grew up with. What makes my search a little bit harder too is that my city is one that was like a transit city, in the sense that people would come to work and, maybe make a living a little bit and then they might move back out. There's a lot of cities that are a little bit more rural around the area that maybe that's where I'm from, and then they came into the city so that I would have access to the orphanage. So there's a lot of factors of, do I even still have family members in that region? And this past January, I did decide to go back and do the route that my parents took when they adopted me originally, and I went to Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Nanning, which is where I'm from. And I thought that would be a really, emotional, impactful journey. And for me personally, I did not prepare well enough for Hong Kong. So there was a lot of culture shock that kind of influenced how the rest of the trip went. But when I got to Nanning, it was interesting because you would go past a school and be like, oh, I could have grown up there. But at the same time, you're like, the education system in the US is much better than in China. And so I'm very grateful to have had the privilege that I have. And I remember trying to go to the orphanage. Not that I think I would have been able to just walk in, but just to see it. And it was in like this medical complex, I think. And so I couldn't get access to it. And then I decided to go over to the railway station where I was like found in. And there was a lot of security because it was close to the Chinese New Year. And so I'm just like looking at it and I personally didn't feel like any connection to the spot because at that point I had traveled a lot in China and it's a freaking railway station. I'm like, okay, I don't know where in this railway station I was left. I don't even know if that spot is still available. Things have changed so much in the last 20 something years. For me, it was honestly not as emotional as I thought it would be. I think maybe if it's your first time going back to China and you go straight to where you were born or adopted from, then yes, there's going to be more emotions tied to that. But for me, it was just like, okay, let's go on to the next place. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. And if you have any questions, feel free to make some comments below. I feel like this video has gotten really depressing. Like, it's not meant to be. It was more just to be like an update. But yeah, I think the process of finding birth parents is definitely highs, lows, very bizarre commentary. Find community where you can. There's a lot of Facebook groups. I even learned some new things by following people in the Facebook groups. Like, I had these 3 marks on my arm that I thought were birthmarks, that I thought possibly could be something to identify me by. And I found out that a lot of the adoptees have it because it's some kind of immunization shots that some of us have 1, some of us have 2. I think I have 3 because the US didn't trust the vaccinations that China gave. But I don't think I would have ever known that if I hadn't joined this Facebook group. I started connecting with other adoptees, and that's not something I had ever done. And to hear the diverse stories and the diverse feelings of people who truly have no desire to reconnect with their birth parents and people who really want to or have, it was, very eye-opening to me to see and hear all these different opinions, especially for people who had really poor adoption stories and others who had really positive ones, and people who have siblings and people who don't have siblings. I would say find community, lean on them when you can, share and give what you can. I question my own intentions too on, am I subconsciously holding myself back? I don't know about you, but I definitely believe in tarot, and I've had a reading where someone has said, like, you might be able to find your birth parents, but don't expect too much from them, or there might be some not great intentions for why they may continue to communicate with you, or you may feel like they're trying to take advantage of you, and so definitely go in with a guarded heart. I've had other people, like other mediums, tell me they did love you, but they had other children that they had to take care of, and for that reason, unfortunately, with the situation, they were not able to take care of you. It's a little scary to be in the unknown, but it's also kind of scary to be in the known. Truly, if you're interested at all in finding your birth parents, I'd encourage you to at least lay out a plan of what you'd like to do, or maybe even if you don't have the reasoning behind why you want to search, if it's something in your intuition telling you you've got to at least try. This process is one that can be full of ups and downs, and it can be exciting in some places and it can be heartbreaking in others. And so this has been a really rambly video. I honestly didn't know where I was going with it besides sharing an update on what I was doing with my own process. I'll go ahead and link the blog post that I wrote that kind of shares some resources and some knowledge, and I'll put some of those resources in the description box too, so that you can at least start on your own journey. Future Maggie here. I have been editing this video, and I have definitely rearranged parts to make it flow in a more cohesive manner. So apologies for some of the diversions and trains of thought and whatnot, but I'm going to go ahead and end out the video here. If you have any questions about trying to find your birth parents and any of the things that I mentioned here today, go ahead and write it in the comments below, and I will try to address it as soon as I see them. But otherwise, if you're interested in stories about identity or travel around China, hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Thanks.